Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, and I just want to thank Wendy. It's kind of interesting. We did not collaborate. I'm sure she saw the email from last night, but we didn't collaborate. And yet the quote that she pulled for us this morning just works perfectly into what we're talking about. Unplugging from the way of the world, unplugging from the ordinary state of mind, the ordinary consciousness, and preparing ourselves for the experience of the miracle, if you want to call it that, the miracle of our personal awareness, our personal experience of the presence of the divine. So what I was talking about last night, what I was reminded of as these thoughts were kind of coming together, the main thing was just prepare. We must prepare, But I remember we were listening to a series of tapes on Jewish mysticism as part of our Wednesday night group one night. And the rabbi was talking about the importance of the festivals and the holidays and the holy days in that tradition. And in our busyness of life, we tend to lose the symbolism of things. We tend to kind of lose, if you will, the magic, for lack of a better term. The subtle message, the importance, why things were done this way and not that way, and what's the significance of them, and all of this. And what he was saying is, it was in those details, it was in those little details of preparing for the holy days that really people learned of their religion. They learned what it was about to be Jewish. So he was saying, it's not something that you get out of a textbook. You can't read a book of instruction. I'm sure there are some, but he said the importance is in the living, in the doing, in the daily, day-to-day activities. So what he was saying is that throughout the year, for somebody who was an adherent and a practitioner, somebody who was a devout practitioner, the entire year, the liturgical year, if you want to call it that, the entire year was kind of consumed in moving from one holy day to the next holy day, to the next holy day, to the next holy day. And there was preparation involved, and it depended on what particular day it was, what the preparations might be. There might be things that had to be done around the house. There might be certain meals that had to be prepared, meetings to go to, lessons to go to, all of those kind of things. And then the day of the feast would arrive, and of course everybody would go to the temple and they would celebrate this feast. And they would come home. And what he was saying is that when they came home, before they did anything else, before they cooked a meal, before they sat down, before they did anything else, they immediately began whatever they needed to do to begin preparing for the next holy day, the next one. So in this manner then, whatever the next event was constantly on people's minds. They were constantly preparing for this next celebration, for this next holy day. Their religion was constantly in front of them, constantly something to be lived and to be practiced, and to be in this state of preparation. Now in Christianity, we come to this time of the year, which is called Advent, and you might see different Advent calendars, some of them humorous, but you'll see some Advent calendars on the internet. But basically, Advent was a time of preparation to prepare for the coming. Advent, it's in Latin, venti, veni vidi, something like a venti. It has to do with movement. Yeah, 3 years of Latin in high school, that's all I remember. But it was to prepare for the coming. And of course, the coming that the Christian world is preparing for is the coming of Christmas, the birth of the Christ, which is steeped in symbolism, which is steeped in mythology, which has deep spiritual meaning for all of us, whether we consider ourselves to be Christian or not. There's deep, deep significance there that we can all learn from. But we have to prepare for it. We have to prepare for it. We have to get ready for it. So this idea this morning that we're talking about, it's kind of, it's not hard to explain the concept, but it's not just a concept. See, it's not just something that we say, oh yeah, well, of course, I know what that is. Yes, and we have it. It's not that at all. It's almost like a skill. It's a bad example because it's not a skill. It's not something that we can force to happen. But what I'm reminded of was when I was learning how to fly, and I was reading different books on how to fly, the technique of flying, and different things that you needed to know as a pilot. And somebody wrote a book and they said, flying is an art. You can teach anybody how to fly an airplane in a reasonable amount of time. But they will spend the rest of their lives trying to perfect it. The rest of there's always something you could do a little bit better, see? Always something that you want to try differently. Always something that you want to experience differently. And what I took away from that is there's a difference between knowing about something and knowing it. See, we can read a book or two. You can probably watch a couple YouTube videos, and within a few minutes you will understand the basic concepts of how an airplane flies and what each of the control inputs do, and kind of a general idea of how a pilot has to coordinate power and speed and things like that in order to control the aircraft. It's not terribly difficult to explain the concept any more than driving a car. If you want to get down to the basics of driving a car, one pedal makes it go and the other pedal makes it stop. And there's a lever that makes it go forward or backward, and then there's a wheel that makes it go side to side. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much what a car is from a driver's point of view. But that simple explanation does not describe the experience, does not describe the experience of driving, does not describe the experience of being a person who drives a car. And that's the point that I'm trying to make here with the difference between our religious practice and our spirituality. In religious practice, sometimes what we tend to do is we learn all of the facts. We learn all of the names of things. We learn all of the words and phrases that we need to recite to participate in the ritual. We learn all of those things, but in so doing, and I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm not saying people shouldn't do that. What I'm saying is there's more. Because in so doing, we lose sight of the myth. We lose sight of what that stands for. Now, when I use the term myth, in our society, we tend to use another meaning of the word myth. Myth, like all of the words in our language, it carries several different meanings and several different connotations. So one connotation that we tend to use in our society is that which is false, kind of like a lie or a pretend or a fable. It's just not true. Well, that's a myth. It's kind of like fake. And that's not the way that I'm using myth today. The myth is a symbolization. It's a symbolism. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor that describes the indescribable. So we say something is. It's not like that. That would be simile. But it is. It is that. It is that. And what Joseph Campbell tells us in his work on the mythologies of the world is that the mythology that we believe to be absolutely true, that mythology constitutes our religion. Those are our deepest held values. And yet it's easy for us to look at the mythology of another culture or another religion and say, well, that's not literally true. See, that is a story. And in some cultures, in some religions, the adherents will say, yes, of course it's a story, but it's a teaching story. There's a deep symbolism here. This means something very, very important. And we wish to connect with that importance. We wish to connect with that importance. And what Campbell goes on to tell us is that the ritual is the reenactment of the myth. That's what the ritual is. But what has happened to us in our modern culture, at least according to Campbell, is that we no longer can connect to the myths. We no longer relate to them. We no longer can understand them. So he gave us an example drawing from Native American culture of some of the dances that the Native Americans would do, in which participants would put on costumes, and someone would perhaps be an antelope, and some would perhaps be a buffalo, and all these things. And to a Western observer looking at it, we say, well, these people are pretending to be animals, and we try to assign all kinds of intellectual meanings to it. And Campbell says that misses the point. That misses the point. The spirit, the unity, the connection of the life of the tribe and the herd, there's a sacred synergy there that people understood, and they were reenacting. But they weren't pretending, they were reenacting. They were living the myth. That had a meaning to them, the connectedness of nature and human life, the fact that it was one. They understood that. So when we come into our own cultures, our modern day cultures, and our modern day religion, and our modern day the way that we celebrate holidays, what I'm suggesting is that we have lost our connection. Not everyone, right? Not all the time, but just as a general statement, we have lost our connection with the significance of what the holidays actually mean in terms of spiritual growth. And we tend to get caught up then into either the religious ritual, the religious preparation, going to church, saying our prayers, doing all those kind of things, or we get caught up into the secular celebration. Buying Christmas gifts, going shopping, hanging stockings, putting up the tree, decorating the tree, telling the kids all about Santa Claus, all those kind of things that we get caught up in. And when we do that, and we just kind of get caught up in that, I think sometimes we're missing out. We're missing out on.
I don't know that one.
We're missing out on the importance of the festival. Why was it there in the first place? What's the significance of it? Why is the Christmas holiday at the solstice? What do the people who celebrate the solstice, the people who predated Christianity, what was it that they were experiencing? Why is Hanukkah the festival of lights? Why is it also around the solstice, you see? And we start to come to some deeper, perhaps some deeper understanding, something that we can connect to, something that we can relate to. The light coming into the world, the light burning in the oil, in the lamp that should not have burned because the oil should have been expired. But yet it signified the presence of God with the people. Right? God is still with us. In the more ancient religions, people understood the connection between the light and life itself. And if the light was coming back, if the days were getting longer, as sure as the days were getting longer, spring would come. Planting would come. Harvest would come. New animals would be born. Life would continue on. So at a time when we can imagine when people had a deeper connection to the earth, to the seasons, people sat outside more than we do, you know. Can you imagine what it would be like to sit outside all night in a field, watching over your sheep? Now, of course, that didn't happen in December, right? It was too cold. And that kind of gives us a clue that the Christmas narratives that we get. We're going to spend a little bit more time as we go through the month talking about the Christmas narratives. But it kind of gives us a clue that Christmas narrative was placed in December on the solstice for the symbolism, for what it meant. That and the fact that people just naturally feel, there's something within people, the people connected to the earth, that just naturally feel the awe, the need to do something, the significance of the solstice. So what I'm suggesting here is a couple things that I just want you to ponder. And that is that there's a difference between religion and spirituality. And the second thing is that our spirituality takes time for us to prepare. That all of the things that people were taught to do in the realm of religious adherence may have worked for them only at the level of being a good adherent to the religion, being a good member of the particular community or culture or things like that, you know. We tend to define ourselves at that first level of consciousness that I talk about. We tend to define ourselves by our culture and our community, you know. And you'll hear people talk like that. You know, somebody will ask them something, and the answer will be, well, you know, and then they'll blurt out whatever their particular denomination is, and then they'll kind of state that, you know, what they're saying is well, I behave this way because that's the way my culture taught me to behave, right? So you're kind of identified with that, and that's okay. But there's more. You see, there's more. There's the identifying with the culture and the ritual, and then there's the symbolism and what does it all mean. But then there's the living of it, the being of it, the feeling it, the participating in the actual mythology itself. So religion is based on somebody else's experience of the presence of God. In one way, shape, or form, if we go back and look at different religions, they started when somebody had an experience. Somebody had some type of experience. And out of the motivation that came from that, out of them telling other people about that, out of their enthusiasm for what they experienced, what happened was religions built up around that. Moses had the experience of the burning bush on Mount Sinai. And in that culture, The burning bush was a symbol for deep meditative experience. Deep meditative experience. In his deep meditative experience, he experienced a fire that did not consume. Right? By the way, for my friends down in Wilmington, I was thinking of this morning. When you're driving up College Road, coming up from Carolina Beach and going out of town, I think it's when you get close to Riceville Avenue intersection, right around there. There's a beautiful Methodist church, brick Methodist church, big church on the corner. It's on the right as you're going out of town, and I love it because in the fall they have the pumpkin patch for the kids, and I imagine now they've got a Christmas tree lot. You know, there's always a hub of activity there. But if you ever notice when you're looking at the wall of that, driving up the road, the sign on the wall is a crucifix. It's a Christian church, but it's wrapped in a flame. It's wrapped in a flame. The symbolism of the fire, the flame that burns, the flame that doesn't consume, it burns but it doesn't consume. And it reminds me when I was a boy growing up in the Catholic Church, there was a little prayer that we just used to recite. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, kindle within them the fire of your love. And when I hear that, the fire of your love, I think of that flame on the side of the Methodist Church. The fire of your love. The symbolism crosses cultures, you see. The symbolism appears different places. If you read Richard Maurice Buck's book on cosmic consciousness, and I highly recommend it. It's not an easy read because it was written around the year 1900, but I highly recommend it because he goes across time and he goes across culture, and he starts to point out all of the different characters, not all of them, but I think he pulled 25 out of history, 25 characters who had some sort of a mystical experience. Now, mystical experiences, by their very definition, are ineffable. There are not words to describe them, and yet people try to describe them. And he would take what they tried to describe. And this feeling of being surrounded by the light, and at times flames, conflagration, flames that did not consume, is something that people report. Paul was blinded by the light, so Paul had this experience on the road to Damascus, and that led to him largely spreading the Christian faith. If you look at Buddhism, the Buddha sat under the tree until he had the experience of enlightenment. If we go to Islam, Muhammad had the experience of the angel. If you come to the United States and you look at the religions that kind of uniquely evolved in the United States, similar with the Mormon, Joseph Smith had an experience of an angel. So my point is that these different religions, even kind of where we fit into New Thought, for example, Quimby had an experience of healing. Mary Baker Eddy studied with Quimby, and she had an experience of healing. The Fillmores of Unity had an experience of healing. Myrtle had an experience. So people have these experiences, and they are so moved by these experiences, they tell other people, this is great, what do you want to do? You got to share this with my friends. This is absolutely wonderful. And what happens is we get this thing called a religion of dogma and creed and studying and things like that tends to form up around it. And I think what happens is over time people lose sight that the purpose of studying and the purpose of belonging is for them to have that experience themselves. At some point in learning to fly an airplane, I was done reading about other people learning how to fly airplanes. I wanted to get in that cockpit myself. Of course, I did with an instructor, but I was very anxious to get rid of the instructor. I was very anxious to get to the point where I could solo. I was very anxious to be a pilot. I no longer wanted to have other people tell me about their experience. I no longer wanted to have someone guide me. I wanted to have the experience myself. Now, reading about other people's experiences and having somebody to guide me were an important part of my growth. But at some point, I needed to have it myself. As we come together week after week, Sunday after Sunday, Wednesday night classes, Monday night prayer groups, all of these different things that we do, I just urge you to remember that the purpose of all of this is to prepare ourselves for the experience of the presence of God in our lives. That's spirituality. That's spirituality. So we don't want to get caught up in the secular idea of Christmas, which is basically brought to us by a bunch of very good marketing people. I watched, Roy and I had this program that we watched on like History Channel or something when we had the satellite years ago. And it was about the history of Christmas, and they were interviewing this man. He was kind of funny. He was very tongue-in-cheek. He said, he says, you have to love the American marketing people. He says, they created a holy day that features a saint who lives in a department store, and people celebrate it by spending lots of money on stuff they don't need, So in the secular world, we have kind of come to this point of it has very, very little, if anything, to do anymore with experiencing the presence of God. So think of what the birth of the Christ means to us. We're probably going to talk more about the Christ itself next week. But in its deepest symbolism, the holiday is about people becoming aware of the presence of God in their midst. Now, it's still kind of outside of us in the form of a person, in the form of a baby in a manger. But the deep symbolism is becoming aware of the presence of the divine in human form. In human form. That's what we want to try to remember the mythology is. That's what we want to try to remember the metaphor is. That's what we want to try to remember this holiday is all about. So what we want to do is we want to get away from the secular, which is about spending money and buying gifts and things like that. And it's a lot of fun, but it's not necessarily enhancing our spiritual growth. And again, the spiritual growth that I'm talking about is growing in that experience of the presence of God. That's what the aim is. That's what the goal is. That's what the progress is. That's what we're constantly preparing for. More and more and more. As Augustine said late in his writings, he said, I ask nothing of thee, not even thy love. I only want thee. I only want thee. So Goldsmith kind of tells us that when we kind of become aware of this thing called God, and it has power to answer prayers and all of these kind of things, our first instinct is to try to use God to make us have a better human life. We want more health, we want more wealth, we want better friends, we want a nice house, we want better spouses, and all these kind of things. And he says what we're trying to do is is we're trying to bring God down to where we are. He says you can't do that. You can't do that. You have to let your consciousness rise up to where God is. Now, God is neither up there nor down here. God is everywhere present, and all presence, which means it is already present as us. We just don't recognize that. See, we just don't recognize that. So this rising in consciousness then is rising in a consciousness into the consciousness that God already is. God already is. God already is right here, right now. God already is as us. It is the very life that has created us out of itself. It is nearer than our hands and feet. It is closer than our breath. And what this means is there's nothing that we can do or have to do to bring it to us. To bring it to us. So this idea of get, use God to get stuff, it's kind of an immature concept. But we go through that. We all go through that. But it's kind of an immature concept. But at some point in time, at some point in the progress of our spiritual growth, by grace, we'll talk about that, grace. Nothing we can do. We don't earn it. We don't force it to happen. It's just a gift. It's just a gift. And by grace, there is a little spark within us, a little something that reminds us, you are more than a human being. You are more than somebody who spends a lot of money on Christmas presents. You are more than somebody who goes to church on a regular basis, keeps the holy days. You are more. You are more. And it is that little spark of spirituality. The poet says it is a spark that we can desecrate, but we can never destroy. Meister Eckhart, the mystic, tells us that the divine is like a child who clears its throat playing hide and seek to be sure that we will find it. One day what happens is we start to awaken to say, oh my goodness, I am a spiritual being. And my purpose in life is to discover what that means. My purpose in life is not to make money. My purpose in life is not to build organizations. My purpose in life is to discover what that means. That doesn't mean that we don't go to work or that we don't build organizations, but they are not our primary reason for being. We may do those things because they allow us to express our spirituality in some way. I express my love for my fellow human beings through what I do. So we start to have this little awakening. We start to have this little birth within, if you will. We start to have this little awareness that the presence is already here. But in order to experience it, we must prepare. We must prepare. We must have our Advent. We must prepare. See, the gifts have already been given, but they must be accepted. They must be received. And if we are to accept them and we are to receive them, we have to accept them and receive them where they are, not where we are. This is what Goldsmith is talking about. Rising in consciousness. So the primary thing that we have to remember is the divine is not a thought. God is not an intellectual experience. We are not going to sit down one day and use logic and reason or mathematics And one day say, oh, I understand. I have experienced God. The divine is an experience that we have. And it's not an experience of the intellect. It is not an experience of the ego. It is an experience of the heart. Dr. Holmes tells us when God speaks to us, God speaks in the language of the heart. And many times we don't hear the answer to our prayers. Of course, we're listening with our head. So our preparation then is, in line with what we were talking about last week, is kind of letting go of all of these things that we know to be true that are not true. All of the busyness of our minds, all of the hustle and bustle, the daily activity, the 1,000 things that we need to think of from the moment the clock goes off in the morning, and we need to stop. The instructions were so simple. Be still and know. Be still and know. We get that from Judaism. Be still and know. In Christianity, we are told to go within, to our prayer closet within. See, God is not something we have to look for out there. The only place we can experience it is here, inside us, because that's literally where we experience everything. But in order to do so, we have to quiet the monkey mind. We have to, as Wendy reminded us, we have to unplug. We have to be still. We have to know. We have to just sit at home with the beloved. And in order to do that, we have to make time to do that. We have to prepare. Just as dutifully as people might have prepared for holy days in the past, getting up in the morning and knowing that today I need to complete this task or that task in order to be on schedule for the holy day, we must have time. We must have time to sit and be still. We must have time to just, as Goldsmith says, just make ourselves available. And what he teaches his students is to just sit and say, your servant is listening. That's it. See? Not trying to tell God, well, God, this is what I need you to do for me today, and can you help me with this, and can you help me with that, and all those other things. There's nothing wrong with doing treatment and bringing our consciousness to a place of accepting that some particular gift has already been given. But that's different from trying to manipulate God and make God do things. But we can get so carried away with trying to change conditions in our lives that we lose sight of the fact that the reason that we do that is it causes us to come into a greater experience of the presence of God. So we want to very deliberately set time where we sit down for no reason other than to make ourselves available to the presence of God. Your servant listens. Your servant is listening. I am here. And that's it. See, that's it. And of course, when we try to do that, when we first try to sit and meditate, what happens is our minds are going at 1,000 miles an hour. Thoughts are coming in and out of our head. We're thinking of all the things that we forgot to do. We're thinking of all the things that we're going to need to do. Did I send all my Christmas cards? Yada, 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 yada. And we have to be able to just move beyond that. We have to practice that. It takes practice. Just like flying a plane takes practice. Just like driving a car takes practice. We have to sit until the things that are going by in the monkey mind don't distract us anymore. We see them, they're there, but they're totally unimportant. We're not engaged. We're not engaged in them. In Buddhism, they talk about don't engage your thoughts. And very quickly, the difference. So the TV's on and you're watching the TV and you're very engrossed in the show, and somebody comes in the room and asks you a question. You say, wait a minute, I want to see how this ends. You're engaged. Somebody else in the room is watching a TV show and you have absolutely no interest in it. It's there, you hear it, things are moving on the screen, people are talking, who cares? We come into our meditation and then we start to treat our own thoughts the same way. They're there. Who cares? Let them go. So our preparation, and we want to kind of keep it very, very simple, right? What we want to start with is an awareness of and a belief in the fact that there is another experience to be had, a different experience than the daily human experience. It is the experience of the presence of God within us. It is commonly called the mystical experience. And as we move into Christmas, as we move into the experience of the Christ, we are talking about the mystical experience. We have to be aware that it exists. And if we're not, you can start by reading Buck's book, Cosmic Consciousness. You can read about different saints who have had experiences. You can go back and you can take the different religions of the world and you can go back and you can see if you can figure out who had the experience that started it. But there is this something, this other ineffable experience that we have, the spiritual experience. So if we start with our belief that it exists and it is possible for us, in fact it is inevitable for us, then the next step becomes our intention. Do you intend to allow yourself to be open to that experience? See, there's nothing you can do to force it, You can't make it happen. It's already there. You can let yourself experience it. So is it your intention to allow yourself to prepare? And we know then that this preparation is a letting go. It is not an adding on, it's a letting go. And are we willing to let go of our monkey mind? Our daily clutter, the daily news, all of the distractions of the world, and just sit at home with the beloved. When we are starting our journey, yes, we need to have things to study. We need to have teachers who point the way. But at some point, as Dr. Holmes tells us, at some point when we have made the contact, at some point, the only one who can teach us from that point on is the beloved itself. So we must be willing to let go even of our favorite teachers, even of our favorite textbooks, even of our favorite religions and our favorite rituals. We must be willing to let go of all of that and simply be at home with the beloved. So I invite you this December, look at your calendars, find a way to mark off some time, 20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, whatever. Don't look at what you can afford, Don't look and say, well, but I've only got 5. Find 20 minutes a day. And if you can find 20 minutes twice a day, that's even better. But find that time. That is your time to unplug. That is your time to prepare. Find a beautiful spot in nature. You can, for those down by the beach. The ocean always did it for me. but find a beautiful spot to just simply go and sit. Let your thoughts wind down and just say, your servant is listening. That's how we prepare. And so it is.